I learned some time ago that it's not near so important that you write your own speech as it is to write your own introduction. So thank you very much. I understand we're somewhat short of time. Don't worry, I really haven't spoken more than 18 and a half minutes since 1974. So I believe that we will have time for questions. I'm prepared to answer questions on any subject. Anything you'd like to ask, I'll be prepared to talk about those, although I'm here today to talk about government and media relations. Before I get into some of my comments, however, I'd like to refer to my friend Cliff White. I've known Cliff for a number of years. We have not always been on the same political track, almost, but not always. But I think what Cliff is doing here with the John Ashbrook Center for Public Affairs is extremely important for Ashland College. I think it's a facility and activity which you should be proud of and which is much needed in the Midwest. And I congratulate those of you who are responsible for this and President Schultz for your encouragement of this program. I entered the White House when I was 29 years old and left when I was 35. I'm not going to tell you how old I am now, but sometimes I'm asked, and the question and answer is what I've been doing since those days of exile in San Clemente. As you may remember, those of you who are old enough, that I flew out to San Clemente with President Nixon after the resignation and spent 12 months there in San Clemente looking at the sunset and organizing the transition period from the Ford White House. Following that, I spent a great deal of time in the Middle East and in Europe as senior vice president for a major international engineering firm. We were involved in building the University of Riyadh, which we anticipate soon will be covered with sand due to the drop in oil prices and that country's inability to maintain the facility. But I was one of those businessmen who spent a great deal of time in the Middle East in the 70s when the boom existed. Found that I was losing control of my knowledge of events in the United States, so decided to come back and get involved in the TruckStop industry. All of you know what that is, of course. Your impression probably is what mine was when I was first called by the headhunter who asked me if I would consider becoming president of the TruckStop industry, and I said if they changed their name I might give that some consideration. He said, no, go ahead and at least meet with the people who are here on the selection committee, and I did, and I found that they were fine businessmen from around the country, fine entrepreneurs, and the TruckStop industry is a $26 billion a year industry, which is a vital part of our economy. We're the 5th largest food service group in the United States, ranking just behind Hardee's, doing $1.5 billion a year in food sales. It's a major industry, and I'm proud to be a part of it. But that's not, of course, what I'm here to talk about today. I entered the White House, as I said, at the age of 29. And I entered the White House as press secretary for one of the controversial political figures of our time, President Nixon. And I entered the White House at a time when our country, as you may recall, was at war, an unpopular war. I entered the White House at the time when our country was torn apart by the war and social unrest. Our young people were confused. The Mideast was in turmoil. Our relationships with the Soviet Union were acrimonious. China was isolated. We had many difficulties domestically going through the last throes of school desegregation. So we had challenges. And we had to communicate and deal with the press. I remember walking into the White House my first day, going behind the desk to give the briefing. I felt that one of the members of the press corps would at least smile and say, "Welcome to the White House." First question I got was from Jim Deacon of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and he said, "Ron," not even a nice tone of voice, he said, "Ron, is the United States involved in Laos?" Quite frankly, I didn't know if the United States was involved in Laos. It was my first day on the job, and I had to no comment and say I don't know if the United States is involved in Laos. I gave 2,500 briefings or press conferences after that date. There's a lot of no comments. But I did learn that if you didn't know, you should find out. And I proceeded through the White House period doing that. And we had good relations with the press, I believe, until the Watergate period. And I have developed certain points of view about press relations, which I'd like to convey to you and talk to you a little bit about, and then answer your questions. Press relations, of course, today is increasing in terms of the amount of discussion that is being applied to it. First of all, I am not concerned about the power of the press today. I believe that public opinion in the United States is strong enough to checkmate the excesses that might occur in the press. I think that broadcast journalism, where the potential of excess exists in the greatest form, is particularly vulnerable to being checked by public opinion. I don't believe that we should be excessively concerned by the report of one anchorman that might be contrary to our point of view and assume that is going to distort public opinion totally for those we favor politically or for what our point of view is. I also feel a concern about public opinion itself. I think that public opinion in the United States is in trouble. I believe that too many people in this country, as they proceed through their daily activities, are not well informed enough, particularly on foreign policy matters, to form legitimate public opinion by which to judge the actions of our leaders. And I think that is a concern that we should have when we talk about government and relations with the press. I believe that government, therefore, evolves a certain sense of responsibility to communicate more effectively with the American people, and the American people have the responsibility to become more informed than, in fact, in many instances they are, in order to create sound public opinion. I developed a series of 7 propositions which I believe are fundamental to good press relations or good communications. First of all, I think, and I feel strongly, that government, when it communicates, should only respond from the base of fact. Government should never, or a spokesman should never shoot from the hip and never guess the answer. Secondly, I feel that government and the administration should never knowingly lie or mislead. That is a subject that is oftentimes discussed. Because no matter what the situation or what the compelling reason might be to mislead or to lie, it will always, 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 and ultimately come out. Always. And if one individual has experienced that in their lifetime, it's me. If you take a cake to Iran and a Bible signed by the President of the United States, it's going to become news. And if you deny that you did that or create the perception that you did that, it's going to come out, as it did in terms of the unfortunate situation relevant to Bud McFarland. I believe it is the obligation of those who serve in positions of power and positions of leadership to anticipate and be aware of that. I know that I was faced from time to time with the dilemma can I say what I know, or do I have to mislead? There's no question about the fact that when I was press secretary, I gave answers that were not true, certainly in terms of Watergate. Fortunately, I was not involved in the cover-up, and therefore, what I said at the time, which turned out to be untrue, I did not know I was misleading the public when I said them. That was the result of the cover-up. But the key is for a government official never to go to the podium with a state of mind that he is going to lie or mislead. If he does, he is misserving the man who he works for, the President of the United States, and the administration, which he is the spokesman for. When Henry Kissinger went to China, when the secret negotiations were going on with China for the opening to China, you may recall there was a suggestion that he had a stomach ache, and he was in Pakistan, and therefore he was delayed in Pakistan for a few days. Cliff Evans, a reporter for RKO at that time, asked me in a press conference, Ron, does Kissinger's delay in Pakistan have anything to do with China? I was one of 3 people who knew that Henry was going to China to negotiate with them the opening to China. My immediate response was, it's not on the schedule, next question, and got by with it. Nobody followed up. Had I been pressed, and fortunately I was not, by Cliff or other members of the press in that room, that would have been the only dilemma in 2,500 press conferences that I would have faced in terms of an answer. If I would have said no comment, it would have stimulated a great deal of interest, of course. If I would have said absolutely not, it would have been, of course, a total fabrication on my part. And if I would have said yes, it perhaps could have destroyed the trust between China and the United States. I also feel that government should not attempt to manipulate or over-program or over-manage a communications policy. When they do, they are not credible and only pose difficulties for their administration. The Nixon administration, to some degree, did that when some of the advanced men developed what they referred to as storyboards. And they would bring those storyboards into my office, they brought them in once, and had a layout of what a photograph in the President's office should look like and how the press office should stage that photograph. That's over-programming. It's found out about quickly. Manipulation is attempting to leak an uncredible story or to release information which is obviously totally in the self-interest of an administration. Never overreact to criticism is another tenet, which I think is extremely important. Even though you feel that the criticism is unjust, I believe that government and those who speak for government should always react from a position of control and a total understanding of the root of the criticism. Reacting to the press in an uncontrolled fashion simply distorts communication, in my opinion. It is also a mistake, in my view, to adopt a frame of mind that the press is the enemy and that the press is unfair. There is absolutely no question at all in my mind that the press can be unfair, can pursue a public official in an unjust fashion, but the press is a collection of parts. And the totality of the press in America is the important point. I have never seen an official who has looked at the press as the enemy succeed in his communications. Those who do succeed in communications and press relations anticipate how the press will react to them. and they anticipate how the press will react from a firm and thorough understanding of themselves. Those who don't, I believe, do not succeed in their communications efforts. A lot has been talked about recently about the Iranian matter, and I will look forward to some of your questions on that. In my opinion, the Iran situation can go a lot further than it is currently proceeding, particularly with the current release of the information that there was a computer that maintained all of the communications that occurred between the National Security Council personnel. I am hopeful that this will not lead to a further deterioration of the Reagan presidency, because I believe that President Reagan has been an extremely good leader for this country. I believe that President Reagan has instilled a spirit of strength, a period of pride in this country, and has done an exceptional job of leading us from the 70s into the 80s. I am concerned, however, that the men around President Reagan have not followed some of the obvious tenets or premises which I pointed out in the 7 points that I indicated earlier. I was asked by a group that I spoke to at Dow Chemical if I felt those 7 points worked, how come the Nixon administration got in so much difficulty? And I had to, of course, explain that I hadn't written them at that time. But I would hope that the Iran matter becomes history, but I don't think that we should be naive in thinking that the Democratic Party is going to let it go away, or that the probing American press corps is going to let it pass. If there is more information to be revealed, it will in fact be revealed. Now, before we go to your questions, and I purposely am trying to cut through my remarks because of the limitation of time, I think it would be appropriate for me to anticipate one or two of your questions by referring to President Nixon and some of the questions I often get regarding President Nixon. President Nixon is alive and well in New York City. He's living in New Jersey with Pat Nixon. Pat Nixon, in fact, is in fairly good health. She recently, as you may have read, had a minor operation on a growth in her mouth, but that came out without a problem. And they're happy with their grandchildren and with their family. What do I talk to President Nixon about when I talk to him? He talks a lot about his grandchildren. He talks about world events. He talks about how things were when we were in the White House, but he does not dwell on that. I have a great deal of respect for President Nixon, and I think this is one thing that young people can learn from life and perhaps from President Nixon's career. So I said earlier, President Nixon was a controversial political figure for a number of years throughout his political career. He resigned in disgrace because of Watergate. However, he did not permit those tragic events to destroy him as a person. He knew that only he could destroy himself. I remember he said, I was telling the students earlier, he said to me at one stage, the day of resignation, he said, "Ron, we cannot let the light go out of our life." I didn't know what he was talking about. He said, "We cannot let the light go out of our life." When he gave his remarks to the staff just before the helicopter lifted off of the South Lawn, he referred to a young lawyer in New York who at a young age had lost his wife and baby who died in childbirth. And this young lawyer in New York wrote that the light had gone out of his life and he had nothing to live for. And he didn't know how he could go on. And I learned the next day that that young lawyer in New York was Theodore Roosevelt. who went on to become President of the United States and wrote the passage "Man in the Arena," which President Nixon referred to in his farewell remarks to the staff. When we arrived in San Clemente, Richard Nixon did not settle down with a bottle of Chivas Regal and a sweatshirt. He began each day by coming into the office in a coat and tie. I was startled by this. And he began a disciplined process of self-evaluation, recognizing his mistakes. He was not sitting there to conspire about how he could reemerge and become an ambassador or anything. He was sitting there fully cognizant of what had happened to the country under his leadership, and was determined, above all, not to destroy himself. And if you look at the man today, I'm often asked, how has he emerged from that period of time? If you look at the man today, he has written 5 books since his resignation. One of those books was on the bestseller list for an extended period of time, No More Vietnam. He is making a contribution to the American people. He's making a contribution of thought. He's not making a contribution of personality. He's making a contribution of thought. He's writing his 6th book now, Foreign Policy for the 21st Century, which is less than 20 years away, of course, coming up on us quickly. So I think that all of us can learn, if nothing else, a lesson from President Nixon's leadership, that no one can destroy you except yourself. And I think that is true in government and press relations. I have never seen the press destroy a politician. I have never seen the press destroy a leader. A leader can only destroy himself. And a test of leadership, in my opinion, is to be able to deal naturally with the communications process. Not in a contrived fashion, but deal naturally. Gauguin once was asked by a student, "Master, how do I become a perfect artist?" And without looking up from the canvas, he turned to he said to the student, he said, "First become perfect, and then begin to paint naturally." No one is perfect, but I believe striving to be perfect and working on the natural relationship of communications, a leader in the United States will be able to cut through the day-to-day concerns of what is said, good or bad, about him, and strive for legitimacy in communication and legitimacy of presenting a true posture of himself. What Dan Rather says about the catastrophic insurance proposal on the evening news is insignificant. What is significant is if it is a position you believe in, and if it is a policy that is supported, and if it becomes law, and if it becomes a program that exists in this country, the leader will get the credit for it. So before we go to your questions, I would like to conclude simply by saying that I would like to see the focus of the debate in America not on whether or not a national news personality says something that might offend our position. I would like to see the focus go more to this point. We in the United States have the ability to be the best informed people in the world. There is a diversity of journalism and a quality of journalism that exists in this country that permits us to be that. And if we are going to become, as a people, and as we are obligated to do in a republic, to be substantial and significant formers of public opinion, to judge our leaders and the action of our leaders, to keep the strength of our republic what it is, then we have an obligation to be informed. We have an obligation to know where Nicaragua is. We have an obligation to know where the Straits of Hormuz is. We have an obligation to know the strategic location of Iraq and Iran as it impacts on the world power force. Because remember, there is an East and there is a West. And the East is fundamentally, in its very being, contrary to those of us who love the West and the liberties that exist in this part of the world. We have an obligation to form legitimate, solid, sound public opinion. Our public opinion will check any excess on the part of the press. We as a people are strong enough and should be secure enough in our own beliefs not to, as I said earlier, allow the free press in the United States in any way to intimidate our point of view or to intimidate our leadership. To conclude, I believe it's the process of being natural, of being credible, and conducting a forthright and honest policy. That's the secret to government and press relations. Thank you very much.